Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The headlights flickered, and my heart sank. Not now. Not here. I was driving home from my sister's place, taking the long way to avoid traffic. The storm had been brewing all day, but now it unleashed its full fury. Rain pelted my windshield like tiny bullets, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The road ahead was a blur of darkness and water. That's when my car decided to give up. It started with a strange grinding noise. I eased off the gas, hoping it would stop, but then the engine cut out completely. I coasted to the side of the road, my stomach twisting into knots. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The rain drummed on the roof, creating a cacophony that matched my racing thoughts. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere in a storm, with a dead car. I tried the key again, praying for a miracle. Nothing, not even a click. My phone was the next logical step. I fumbled for it in my purse, my hands shaking slightly. No signal, of course. "Come on," I muttered, holding the phone up to the window. Still nothing, just a mocking, "no service" and message staring back at me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Someone would come along eventually, right? It was just a matter of waiting it out. I locked the doors and settled in, watching the rain hammer down on the windshield. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The rain didn't let up. The road stayed empty. I could feel panic starting to creep in, but I kept telling myself it would be fine. I turned off the headlights to save the battery and sat in the dark. The sound of the rain was deafening, pounding against the roof of the car. There were moments where I swore I heard something else, something moving out there in the dark. I tried not to think about it. It was around the 3rd hour when I finally saw headlights coming from behind me. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I sat up straighter, hoping whoever it was would stop. As the lights got closer, I could see it was a big truck, one of those old beat-up ones with an engine that rumbled loud even over the rain. The truck slowed down as it passed my car, then stopped a few feet ahead. My heart was racing again, but this time from a mix of relief and nerves. I wasn't sure what kind of person would stop for a stranded woman in the middle of nowhere in the rain. But at that point, I didn't have much of a choice. I saw the driver's door open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face and a dark jacket. He stood there for a moment, looking at my car through the rain, before walking over. I cracked my window just a bit, enough to talk, but not too wide. I didn't want to let the rain in, but also, something about him made me hesitate. "Car trouble?" he asked, leaning down a little to peer inside. "Yeah, it just died on me a few hours ago," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I've been waiting for someone to pass by." He looked around, scanning the empty road, then back at me. "No service out here, huh?" I shook my head. "None." He was quiet for a moment, then smiled a little too wide, showing a bit too many teeth. "Lucky I came by then," he said, his voice too casual. "Not a lot of people take this road at night, especially in weather like this." I nodded, hoping he would just offer to call someone for me, but instead, he stepped closer to the window, glancing inside the car. "You alone out here?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he asked made me uncomfortable. "Yeah, but my husband knows I'm stuck," I lied. "He's on his way." The man didn't seem convinced. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "In this weather, going to take him a while to get here." I didn't know what to say. I just wanted him to leave, or at least call for help and go, but he wasn't moving. He kept staring at me, his eyes lingering a little too long, making me feel like I was trapped in my own car. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" he asked suddenly, stepping back and motioning toward the front of the car. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude or scared. Sure, I said, popping the hood. He walked around to the front of the car, and I watched as he fiddled with something under the hood. But after a few minutes, he came back to the window, shaking his head. "Looks like your battery's dead," he said, but there was something off about his tone. "I can give you a jump, but you'll probably need a tow." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "That would be great. Thanks." He walked back to his truck, and I watched him through the rearview mirror. My heart was racing again, and my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Something about this didn't feel right. I didn't trust him. He took his time getting the cables, moving slower than he needed to. When he finally came back and hooked them up, he leaned into my window again, closer this time. "You know, it's dangerous for a woman to be out here alone," he said, his voice low. "You never know who might come by." His words sent a wave of fear through me, but I forced a smile. "Yeah, well, I'm lucky you stopped." He smiled again, that same unsettling grin. "Yeah, lucky." He got back into his truck and revved the engine to charge my battery. After a few minutes, my car sputtered to life. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. As I thanked him, he leaned in one last time. "Maybe you should let me follow you, just in case something happens again." I shook my head quickly. "No, that's okay. My husband's almost here. Thanks for the help." His smile faded for a second, but then it returned, colder this time. "All right. Suit yourself." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I pulled away as fast as I could, not caring if I was driving too fast for the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest the entire time, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his truck following me. But thankfully, it wasn't there. I didn't slow down until I was back on a well-lit, populated road. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As I drove, my mind raced with what-ifs. What if I hadn't lied about my husband? What if I had let him follow me? What were his true intentions? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. I made it home safely that night, but the experience stayed with me. Every time I drive alone now, especially at night or in bad weather, I think about that man. I think about how quickly a simple car breakdown can turn into something potentially dangerous. I've since learned to always be prepared. I keep an emergency kit in my car, complete with jumper cables, a flashlight, and a portable battery pack for my phone. I make sure someone always knows where I am when I'm traveling alone, and I trust my instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. That night taught me that the real monsters aren't always supernatural beings or movie villains. Sometimes, they're just ordinary people who take advantage of others in vulnerable situations. It's a lesson I'll never forget, and one I hope others can learn from without having to experience it firsthand. As I settled into bed that night, the storm still raging outside, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that I had made it home safely, grateful for the instincts that had kept me cautious, and grateful for the wake-up call that had made me more aware of my surroundings. But even as I drifted off to sleep, a part of me couldn't shake the image of that man's smile, too wide and too cold, or the sound of his voice as he suggested following me home. In my dreams, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, always there, no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential dangers that lurk in everyday situations. But I'm also stronger, more prepared, and more determined to never let myself be a victim. As the days passed, I found myself checking the local news, half expecting to see a story about a woman who wasn't as lucky as I had been. But there was nothing. Just the usual reports of minor accidents and weather-related incidents. Sometimes, I wonder if I overreacted, if the man was just trying to help, and my fear had twisted his actions into something sinister. But then I remember the look in his eyes, the way he lingered too long, asked too many questions. and I know that trusting my instincts was the right thing to do. I've shared my story with friends and family, urging them to be careful, to be prepared. Some listen with wide eyes, promising to be more cautious. Others brush it off, assuring me that nothing like that would ever happen to them. I hope they're right, but I know better now. I know that danger can find you when you least expect it, on a lonely road in the middle of a storm. The experience has become a part of me now, a constant reminder to stay alert, to trust my gut, and to never take my safety for granted. It's a heavy lesson, but one I'm grateful to have learned without paying a higher price. And so, life goes on. I still drive that road sometimes, when I visit my sister. But now, I make sure my car is in perfect condition before I leave. I check the weather forecast obsessively, and I always keep my phone charged and within reach, because you never know when a simple drive home might turn into something much more dangerous. And when it does, being prepared might just save your life. The first raindrop hit my face like an icy finger, and I knew I was in trouble. I'd been so caught up in the thrill of exploring new trails that I'd completely lost track of time and my bearings. I've always loved hiking, the solitude of nature, the challenge of pushing my limits. But as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, I realized I'd made a rookie mistake. I was lost. The trail markers I'd been following now obscured by the growing gloom and the increasingly dense foliage. The rain started in earnest, fat droplets quickly soaking through my light jacket. I hadn't packed for this. Another mistake. My phone, usually a reliable lifeline, showed no signal. Of course, I was truly on my own. I pushed on, hoping to find a familiar landmark or at least some higher ground where I might get my bearings. But the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming larger and more ominous with each passing minute. The sound of the rain drumming against the leaves created a disorienting white noise that made it hard to think clearly. As darkness fell, panic began to set in. I was soaked to the bone, shivering, and completely turned around. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station, or at least another hiker with a campfire. I stumbled towards the light, branches whipping at my face, mud sucking at my boots. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a small cabin. It wasn't much, just a simple wooden structure, but in that moment, it looked like salvation. I approached the door, my heart pounding. This deep in the woods, who knew what or who I might find, but I was out of options. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound barely audible over the howling wind and pounding rain. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to knock again, I heard movement inside. Slow, shuffling steps approached the door. I held my breath as it creaked open. The man who stood before me was not what I expected. He was old, impossibly old, with a face so lined and weathered it looked like a topographical map. His eyes, pale and rheumy, seemed to look right through me. Hello," I stammered, water dripping from my chin. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've gotten lost in the storm. Could I possibly come in and warm up for a bit?" The old man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at me with those unsettling eyes. Then, slowly, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice a dry rasp that sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me that something wasn't right. But the howling wind at my back made the decision for me. I stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. A small fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and I gravitated towards it, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you so much," I said, turning to face my host. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your cabin." The old man had shuffled to a rickety chair by the fire. He lowered himself into it with a groan, his joints creaking almost as loudly as the chair. Not many people come this way, he said, his eyes never leaving me, especially not on a night like this. I tried to smile, but something about his gaze made it difficult. I got turned around on one of the trails. I thought I knew where I was going, but I trailed off, suddenly aware of how foolish I sounded. The old man nodded slowly. The forest can be treacherous. It doesn't like outsiders. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to such a strange statement. Well, I'm certainly grateful for your hospitality. Once the storm passes, I'll be on my way. The storm won't pass, he said, with a certainty that chilled me more than the rain had. Not for a long while. I looked towards the single window, streaked with rain. The wind howled outside, as if to confirm his words. "Do you have a phone I could use?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "My family will be worried sick." The old man shook his head. No phone, no electricity, just me and the forest. My heart sank. I was truly cut off from the world, alone with this strange old man in his isolated cabin. I tried to reassure myself. He had taken me in, after all. Surely he meant me no harm. As if reading my thoughts, he spoke again. "You're safe here, for now." The way he said "for now" made my skin crawl. I forced another smile. "I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll be able to find my way once it's light out." He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with those pale, unblinking eyes. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the relentless pounding of the rain. I cleared my throat, desperate to break the tension. "So, do you live out here all alone?" A small smile curved his thin lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not alone. Never alone. I glanced around the small cabin, half expecting to see someone else emerge from the shadows, but we were still the only two people in the room. "Oh, do you have family nearby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shook his head slowly. "No family, but the forest. The forest is always here, always watching, always hungry." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. The way he spoke about the forest, as if it were a living, sentient thing, was deeply unsettling. "I'm sure it must get lonely out here," I said, edging slightly away from him. His smile widened, showing teeth that were far too sharp and yellow. "Lonely? No. The forest provides company, and occasionally, it provides visitors." The implication in his words was clear, and fear gripped me. I stood up abruptly, no longer caring about politeness. "I think maybe I should try to find my way back. The rain seems to be letting up a bit." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. If anything, the storm seemed to have intensified, the wind howling like a living thing outside the cabin walls. The old man didn't move from his chair, but his eyes followed me as I edged towards the door. "You can't leave," he said, his voice somehow carrying over the noise of the storm. "The forest won't let you." I reached for the door handle, my hands shaking. Thank you for your hospitality, but I really must be going." As my fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, a deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin. I jumped back, my heart pounding. The old man chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "I told you, the forest wants you to stay." I turned to face him, fear and anger warring inside me. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The forest is old, older than you can imagine. And it's hungry, always hungry. It needs to feed." I backed away, my back pressed against the door. "You're insane. I'm leaving, storm or no storm." I turned and yanked the door open, ready to face whatever was out there rather than spend another moment in this cabin with this madman. But what I saw outside stopped me cold. The forest had changed. The trees seemed to have moved closer, their branches intertwining to form an impenetrable barrier. And in the gaps between the trunks, I saw eyes, hundreds of glowing eyes, watching me. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in short gasps. What? What is this? The old man's laughter filled the cabin, a sound of pure, malevolent joy. I told you, the forest is hungry, and you, my dear, are the feast. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But the cold floor beneath me, the heat of the fire on my face, the old man's laughter ringing in my ears, it all felt terrifyingly real. As the night wore on, the storm outside seemed to merge with the horror inside the cabin. The wind's howl became the voice of the forest, calling for me. The rain beating against the roof sounded like hundreds of hungry creatures clawing to get in. And through it all, the old man sat in his chair, watching me with those pale, hungry eyes, waiting, always waiting. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days, weeks. Time seems to have lost all meaning. The storm never stops, the forest never retreats, and the old man, he never sleeps. Sometimes, in my more lucid moments, I wonder if I'm still out there in the forest, lost and alone, hallucinating all of this as hypothermia sets in. But then I hear the old man's wheezing laugh, feel the heat of the never-ending fire, and I know this is all too real. I write this now as a warning. To you, whoever you are, reading these words, be careful when you venture into the wilderness. Respect the forest, because sometimes, when you're lost in the woods, the most dangerous thing isn't being alone. It's finding that you're not alone at all. And remember, if you ever find yourself caught in a storm, seeking shelter in a lonely cabin deep in the woods, sometimes it's better to face the storm than what waits for you inside. The forest is always hungry, and now, I fear, so am I. The first scream pierced through the patter of rain on our tent, jolting me awake. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I heard it again, a raw, terrified shriek that made my blood run cold. My wife, Sarah, stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. We'd been camping in these woods countless times, but never had we encountered anything like this. The excitement of our annual camping trip had worn off hours ago, replaced by the discomfort of lying on hard ground while rain pelted our tent. Now, as another scream echoed through the night, that discomfort morphed into pure, unadulterated fear. "Maybe it's just an animal," Sarah suggested, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her doubt. I wish I could have agreed with her, but those screams were undeniably human. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands shaking as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness of our tent, illuminating Sarah's pale face. "We should check it out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Someone might need help." Sarah nodded reluctantly. We both knew it was the right thing to do, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. As we unzipped the tent, the sounds of the forest hit us full force. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, but the wind whipped through the trees, creating an eerie whistle. Beneath it all, I could hear something else. Hushed voices, too low to make out words, but unmistakably there. I stepped out first, scanning the area with my flashlight. Our campsite was a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. In the daylight, it had seemed peaceful and secluded. Now, it felt exposed and vulnerable. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak and uncertain. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence. Even the whispering voices had stopped. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Sarah clutched my arm. "Maybe we should go back inside," she whispered. I was about to agree when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing. I swung the flashlight towards it. but whatever it was had vanished into the shadows. "Did you see that?" I asked Sarah. She nodded, her grip on my arm tightening. "What was it?" Before I could answer, we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. They were coming from all around us, closing in on our campsite. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her back towards the tent. "We need to get out of here," I hissed. But as we turned, the beam of my flashlight fell on a figure standing directly in our path. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of a man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothes that hung from his frame like rags on a scarecrow. But it was his face that made my heart stop, or rather, the lack of it. Where his features should have been, there was only a blank, featureless expanse of skin. Sarah's scream tore through the night, matching the ones that had woken us earlier. I stumbled backward, dragging her with me, only to bump into something solid. Spinning around, I found ourselves face to face with another of these creatures. They were everywhere, emerging from the woods like ghosts materializing from the mist. Each one was different. Some short, some tall, some thin, some bulky, but they all shared that same terrifying, featureless face. "Run," I yelled, pulling Sarah towards the gap between two of the figures. We sprinted into the woods, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear the creatures giving chase, their footsteps surprisingly fast and coordinated for beings that seemed so unnatural. We ran blindly through the forest, with no idea where we were going or what direction would lead us to safety. The beam of the flashlight, still clutched tightly in my hand, bounced wildly, creating a strobe-like effect that made the woods seem even more disorienting. "There!" Sarah gasped, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could see lights, a road, or maybe a house. Either way, it was our best chance. We pushed ourselves harder, ignoring the burning in our lungs and the ache in our legs. The lights grew closer, and I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe we would make it out of this nightmare after all. But just as we were about to break through the tree line, something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and disappearing into the underbrush. Sarah stumbled to a stop, turning back for me. "Go!" I yelled, struggling against whatever had hold of me. "Get help!" For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a sob, she turned and ran towards the lights. I watched her go, praying she'd make it to safety. Cold, strong hands gripped my arms, pulling me to my feet. I found myself surrounded by the faceless creatures, their blank visages somehow conveying a sense of curiosity and hunger. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting to the side as if studying me. Then, slowly, it raised a hand to its featureless face. To my horror, the skin began to ripple and shift, molding itself into features. My features. Within seconds, I was staring at a perfect copy of my own face. The others followed suit, their blank faces transforming into a sea of my own terrified expression. It was like looking into a nightmarish hall of mirrors. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only stand there, paralyzed with fear, as the creatures closed in around me. The last thing I remember is a chorus of voices, my voice, repeated over and over, saying, "Welcome home." I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me I'd been found wandering along the highway, miles from our campsite, babbling incoherently about faceless monsters. Sarah was there, tears in her eyes as she clutched my hand. She told me how she'd made it to a nearby farmhouse and called for help, how search parties had combed the woods for days before finding me. The official story is that we were attacked by a bear, that the trauma of the event coupled with exposure and dehydration had caused me to hallucinate. They say there's no evidence of any other people in those woods, let alone creatures like the ones I described. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to me in those woods. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I can't shake the feeling that the face staring back at me isn't quite my own. We don't go camping anymore. The woods hold too many terrors, too many unanswered questions. But even in the safety of our home, I can't escape the memory of that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see those blank faces. Every time I hear a noise in the dark, I'm back in those woods, surrounded by creatures wearing my face. And sometimes in the dead of night, I hear whispers, voices that sound like mine, but aren't. They call to me, urging me to return to the forest, to come home. I try to ignore them. I try to convince myself it was all just a nightmare, a product of fear and imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. Something happened to me in those woods, something that changed me in ways I'm still struggling to understand. Sarah notices it too, though she tries to hide it. I catch her watching me sometimes, a look of uncertainty in her eyes. She says I'm different since that night, that sometimes I don't seem like myself. If only she knew how right she is. I've tried to move on, to forget about that night and the horrors we encountered. But it's not that easy. The memories linger, as vivid and terrifying as the moment they happened. And with each passing day, I find myself wondering, did I ever really leave those woods? Or did a part of me stay behind, replaced by something else? I don't have answers, only questions that keep me awake at night. All I know is that the world is a much stranger and more terrifying place than I ever imagined. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, there are creatures wearing my face, waiting for me to return. So if you ever find yourself camping in the woods and hear screams in the night, don't investigate. Don't try to help. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some horrors are too great to face. As for me, I'll keep fighting the whispers, keep trying to hold on to who I am. But a part of me knows it's only a matter of time before the forest calls me back. And when it does, I'm not sure I'll be strong enough to resist. After all, how do you run from something that wears your own face? The child's silhouette was barely visible through the curtain of rain, a small, lonely figure on the side of the deserted road. I blinked, sure my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the child was still there, a stark contrast against the storm-ravaged landscape. I'd been driving for hours, pushing through the relentless downpour to get home after a grueling business trip. The monotony of the windshield wipers and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt had lulled me into a trance-like state. But the sight of that child jolted me back to full alertness. My foot eased off the accelerator as I approached. What was a kid doing out here, miles from anywhere, in this weather? As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long, dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She wore a yellow raincoat that seemed too thin for the biting cold. I pulled over, my hazard lights blinking in the gloom. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was a bad idea. I was alone on a deserted road, stopping for a stranger. But this was a child. I couldn't just drive by. I rolled down my window, wincing as cold rain spattered my face. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl turned to face me, and I felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the gray light, and her eyes. There was something off about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I'm lost," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Can you help me?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive away, to leave this strange situation behind. But I couldn't abandon a child in need. I took a deep breath and made a decision I would come to question for years to come. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Hop in, and we'll figure out where you need to go." I leaned across to open the passenger door, and the girl climbed in. the car filled with the scent of wet clothes and something else, something earthy and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. "What's your name?" I asked as I pulled back onto the road, windshield wipers working overtime. "Emily," she replied, her voice soft and oddly flat. "Nice to meet you, Emily. I'm Jack. Can you tell me where you live? Or maybe your parents' phone number?" Emily didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, water dripping from her hair onto my car seat. "Emily?" I prompted, glancing at her. "Do you know where your home is?" She turned to look at me then, and I nearly swerved off the road. Her eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. When I looked again, her eyes were normal, a deep brown, but definitely normal. "I need to go home," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting for you, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "My family," she replied. "They're always waiting." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I focused on the road ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Okay, but where is home? Can you give me an address?" Emily pointed ahead. "That way. Keep going." I drove on, the rain seeming to intensify with every mile. The roads were becoming treacherous, deep puddles forming in potholes and at the sides of the asphalt. I slowed down, straining to see through the deluge. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked after we'd been driving for about 20 minutes. We were deep in the countryside now, farms and fields giving way to dense woodland. Emily nodded, her face eerily calm. "We're almost there. Turn right at the next road." I followed her directions, turning onto a narrow, unpaved track that led into the woods. The trees loomed over us, their branches forming a dark canopy that blocked out what little light remained. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path that seemed to wind endlessly into the forest. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I don't think this is right. Maybe we should turn back, find a police station." "No!" she cried, her sudden vehemence making me jump. "We have to keep going. They're waiting." I glanced at her, startled by her outburst. For a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn her eyes were completely black again. But when I looked closer, they were normal. I shook my head, blaming my imagination and the poor light. We drove on in silence, the only sounds the rumble of the engine and the constant drumming of rain on the roof. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car. I had to slow to a crawl to navigate the increasingly narrow and twisting path. Just as I was about to insist we turn back, the woods opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood a house, if you could call it that. It was more like a shack, its wooden walls gray with age, windows dark and empty. No lights shone from within, no sign of life at all. "We're here," Emily said, her voice filled with an emotion I couldn't identify. Was it joy? Fear? I couldn't tell. I stopped the car, staring at the dilapidated structure before us. "Emily, are you sure this is where you live? It doesn't look like anyone's home." She didn't answer. When I turned to look at her, my blood ran cold. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty, with no sign that anyone had ever been there. No wet stains on the seat, no muddy footprints on the floor mat. Nothing. I sat there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? A movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned to look out the windshield, and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing in front of the house, was Emily. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were shadowy figures, tall and unnaturally thin. I couldn't make out their features in the gloom, but I could feel their eyes on me. Emily raised her hand and waved, a smile spreading across her face. But it wasn't a child's smile of innocence and joy. It was something else entirely, something that made my blood run cold. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The tires spun in the mud for a heart-stopping moment before finding purchase. I shot backward down the narrow path, branches whipping against the windows. I don't remember much of the drive back. It's all a blur of rain and darkness and bone-deep terror. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, pulling into a brightly lit gas station like a ship finding safe harbor in a storm. I sat there for a long time, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. When I finally worked up the courage to check the passenger seat in the light, there was no sign that Emily had ever been there. No mud, no water, nothing. I reported the incident to the local police, but they found nothing. No evidence of the house in the woods. No missing children matching Emily's description. They put it down to an overactive imagination fueled by fatigue and the stressful driving conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those figures surrounding Emily, or the smile on her face as she waved goodbye. I don't drive that road anymore. I avoid long trips in the rain, and whenever I see a child alone by the side of the road, I can't help but remember Emily and the terror of that night. Sometimes, helping a stranger isn't the right thing to do. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a nightmare. So if you're ever driving on a lonely road in the rain, and you see a child standing alone, think twice before you stop, because you never know who or what might be waiting in the shadows, ready to welcome you home. The elevator shuddered to a stop between floors, plunging me into darkness. For a moment I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow throughout the small space. I'd been working late again, burning the midnight oil to meet a deadline. The office had been empty for hours, just me and the gentle hum of my computer. When I finally decided to call it quits, the storm outside had reached its peak. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by booming thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Now, trapped in this metal box, I could still hear the storm raging outside. The wind howled through the elevator shaft, creating an unsettling whistle that set my teeth on edge. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. No signal. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the confined space. "Can anyone hear me?" Silence was my only answer. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. No alarm, no voice from a speaker assuring me that help was on the way. Just more silence. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's okay," I told myself. "Someone will notice the elevator isn't working. They'll come looking for you." But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. It was the middle of the night, and I was the only one in the building. No one was coming. That's when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the elevator cable settling. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and unmistakably coming from above me. I looked up, my eyes straining in the dim red light. The ceiling of the elevator seemed to ripple, as if something was moving on the other side. My breath caught in my throat as I watched a small bulge form in the metal, pushing downward. Then, to my horror, the bulge split open. A hand emerged, pale and skeletal, its fingers unnaturally long and tipped with sharp black nails. It groped blindly in the air for a moment before finding purchase on the edge of the opening it had created. I pressed myself against the far wall of the elevator, a scream building in my throat but unable to escape. As I watched, frozen in terror, the hand was joined by another. Together, they widened the hole, tearing through the metal as if it were paper. A face appeared in the opening, and I felt my sanity begin to slip. It was humanoid, but only barely. The skin was a sickly gray, pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were huge, black, and utterly devoid of any humanity. And the mouth, The mouth was filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. The creature began to lower itself into the elevator, its body contorting in ways that defied the laws of physics. I could hear the bones cracking and popping as it twisted and squeezed through the opening. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged for the elevator doors, my fingers scrabbling at the seam where they met. I pulled with all my might, ignoring the pain as my nails bent and broke. To my surprise and relief, the doors began to part. I could see the hallway outside, dimly lit by more emergency lights. Freedom was just inches away. But as I started to squeeze through the gap, I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my ankle. I looked back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had fully entered the elevator and was reaching for me with those impossibly long arms. Its face was split in a grotesque grin, saliva dripping from its needle teeth. With a strength born of pure terror, I kicked out, my foot connecting with the creature's face. It let out a high-pitched shriek that made my ears ring, but its grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I tumbled out into the hallway, scrambling to my feet and running without a backwards glance. I could hear it behind me, its claws scraping against the floor as it gave chase. The sound spurred me on, pushing me to run faster than I ever had before. I reached the stairwell and practically flew down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. The creature's shrieks echoed in the stairwell, sometimes sounding like it was right behind me, other times like it was coming from above or below. By the time I reached the ground floor, my lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. But I didn't stop. I burst out of the stairwell and sprinted across the lobby, my eyes fixed on the main doors and the rainy night beyond. Just as I reached the doors, the power came back on. The lobby was suddenly flooded with bright light, momentarily blinding me. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, and that's when I saw it, my reflection in the glass doors. But it wasn't just me. Standing right behind me, its face hovering over my shoulder, was the creature. Its black eyes met mine in the reflection, and its mouth stretched into that terrible, toothy grin. I spun around, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. But there was nothing there. The lobby was empty, save for me. I stood there for what felt like hours, my back pressed against the doors, eyes darting around the lobby. But nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? It seemed impossible that such a creature could exist, let alone vanish into thin air. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back to the elevator. It was working perfectly now. No sign of the hole the creature had torn in the ceiling. The ride up to my floor was uneventful, the elevator moving smoothly and stopping exactly where it should. When I reached my office, everything was as I had left it. My computer was still on, the screen glowing softly in the dark room. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle rain that pattered against the windows. I gathered my things quickly, not wanting to spend another moment in the building. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. There, on the sleeve of my jacket, was a single, long black hair. I plucked it off, holding it up to the light. It was unlike any hair I'd ever seen, coarse and wiry, more like a bristle than human hair. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the creature's skeletal hands, its impossibly long fingers. I dropped the hair as if it had burned me and practically ran out of the office. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those black eyes, that mouth full of teeth. I kept expecting to hear that scraping sound, to see those long fingers reaching for me from the shadows. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd. A monster in the elevator? It was more likely that I'd dozed off while working and had an incredibly vivid nightmare. The hair could have come from anywhere. Maybe it wasn't even hair at all. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I couldn't forget the terror I'd felt, the certainty that what I'd seen was real. I still work in that building. I still use that elevator, but never alone, and never at night. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or the elevator shutters, I find myself looking up at the ceiling, half expecting to see those pale hands tearing through the metal. Because deep down, I know the truth. Something was in that elevator with me that night, something that shouldn't exist. And worst of all, I don't think it's finished with me yet. So, if you ever find yourself working late, alone in an empty building, and the elevator stops between floors, don't look up. Don't listen for that scraping sound. And whatever you do, don't wait to see what might be trying to get in. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some things once seen can never be unseen. And some nightmares don't end when you wake up, they're just beginning. The truck's headlights cut through the rain like dull knives, barely illuminating the muddy road ahead. We'd been driving for hours, my wife Sarah and I, our 2 kids asleep in the back seat. What was supposed to be a fun family camping trip had turned into a nightmare of wrong turns and washed-out roads. "I think we're lost," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. She was right, of course. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago, and the map on my phone was useless without service. We were well and truly in the middle of nowhere. I was about to suggest we turn around when I felt the truck lurch. The steering wheel jerked in my hands as we slid sideways, tires spinning uselessly in the mud. We came to a stop at an angle, half on and half off the road. "Damn it," I muttered, trying to keep my voice low so as not to wake the kids. I shifted into reverse, then drive, but the wheels just spun, digging us deeper into the muck. Sarah turned to me, her face pale in the dim light. "What are we going to do, Mark?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for her sake. "It's okay. I'll get out and see how bad it is. Maybe I can find some branches or something to give us traction." I opened the door, wincing as the cold rain immediately soaked through my jacket. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the world into a dark, sodden mess. I circled the truck, my boots sinking ankle-deep into the mud with each step. It was worse than I thought. We were stuck good. As I stood there, trying to figure out our next move, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a house or a gas station, somewhere we could at least ask for help. I hurried back to the truck, rapping on Sarah's window. She rolled it down, looking at me expectantly. "I think I saw lights through the trees," I said, pointing. "I'm going to check it out. Maybe someone can help us." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know, Mark. Maybe we should wait for morning. It's dangerous out there." I shook my head. "We can't stay here all night. The kids will be cold and hungry when they wake up. I'll be quick, I promise." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but be careful." I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile and set off into the woods. The undergrowth was thick, branches whipping at my face as I pushed through. The rain seemed to intensify, if that was even possible, soaking me to the bone within minutes. Just when I was starting to think I'd imagined the light, I broke through into a clearing. There, in the center, stood a small, ramshackle house. A single light burned in one of the windows, a beacon in the stormy night. Relief washed over me as I approached the front door. It was weathered and warped, barely hanging on its hinges. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down my spine. But what choice did I have? We needed help. I took a deep breath and knocked. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard movement inside, slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door. It creaked open, revealing a man who looked as old and worn as the house itself. His skin was pale and papery, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were an unnaturally bright blue, almost glowing in the dim light. "Can I help you?" he asked. his voice a dry rasp. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to turn and run. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but my family and I are stuck. Our truck slid off the road about a quarter-mile back. I was hoping you might have a phone we could use, or maybe a tow rope. The old man stared at me for what felt like an eternity, those eerie blue eyes seeming to look right through me. Finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said. "We'll see what we can do." I hesitated for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But the thought of Sarah and the kids, cold and scared in the truck, made me step over the threshold. The inside of the house was as dilapidated as the outside. The wallpaper was peeling. The furniture looked like it hadn't been used in decades. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Wait here," the old man said, shuffling off into another room. I stood there, dripping onto the worn floorboards, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I noticed the photographs. They covered one entire wall, hundreds of them. As I looked closer, my blood ran cold. They were all of people, men, women, children, but something was wrong with each picture. The subjects all had the same terrified expression, their eyes wide with fear, and in the background of each photo, barely visible, was the old man. I was so engrossed in the disturbing images that I didn't hear him return. His voice made me jump. "Your family," he said. "Where are they?" I turned to find him standing much closer than I expected, those blue eyes boring into me. In his hand was not a phone or a tow rope, but a large, rusty knife. Terror gripped me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The old man's face split into a grin, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Don't worry," he said, his voice no longer a rasp, but a deep, rumbling growl. "We'll bring them here. One big, happy family." I didn't think. I just moved. I shoved past him, bolting for the door. I could hear him behind me, that inhuman growl turning into a roar of rage. I burst out into the rain, running as fast as I could through the woods. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, far too fast for an old man. Whatever he was, it wasn't human. I broke through the tree line, the truck coming into view. Sarah must have heard me coming because she had already started the engine. I threw myself into the passenger seat, gasping, "Go, go, go." Sarah didn't ask questions. She slammed the truck into drive, the tires spinning in the mud for a heart-stopping moment before finally finding purchase. We fishtailed onto the road, the back end sliding dangerously close to the ditch before Sarah straightened us out. As we sped away, I looked in the side mirror. There, at the edge of the woods, stood the old man. He wasn't chasing us anymore. He just stood there, watching us drive away, that terrifying grin still on his face. Then as we rounded a bend, he was gone. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached the nearest town. We reported what happened to the police, but they found nothing. No house in the woods, no creepy old man. They put it down to stress and lack of sleep, a shared hallucination brought on by the dangerous driving conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what we escaped from. And I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those photographs, or the inhuman speed with which that old man chased me through the woods. We don't go camping anymore. We stick to well-traveled roads and well-lit cities. But sometimes, when it's raining hard and the power flickers, I can't help but think of that house in the woods. I wonder if it's still there, if that thing is still waiting for unsuspecting travelers to knock on its door. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find us again. So if you're ever driving on a stormy night and your car breaks down on a lonely road, be careful who you ask for help. Because sometimes, the real monsters aren't in the storm. They're waiting for you to knock on their door. The first knock was so soft, I almost missed it over the sound of rain hammering against the roof. I paused, my hand hovering over the TV remote, straining to listen. There it was again, a gentle tap, 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 barely audible above the storm raging outside. I glanced at the clock, 11:43 p.m. Who could be at my door this late, especially in this weather? I'd been home alone all evening, my roommate away for the weekend. The storm had been building for hours, the wind howling around the corners of our old house, making the windows rattle in their frames. I'd been grateful for the distraction of mindless TV to keep my imagination from running wild. But now, as I stood there listening to that soft, persistent knocking, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the draft seeping under the door. "Hello?" I called out, not moving from my spot on the couch. "Who's there?" No answer, just another series of gentle knocks. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It was probably nothing. Maybe a branch blown loose by the wind, tapping against the door, or a neighbor who'd locked themselves out, desperate for shelter from the storm. Slowly, I made my way to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see nothing but darkness and the silver sheets of rain illuminated by our porch light. "Is someone there?" I asked again, my hand on the doorknob. Silence. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A voice, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Please," it whispered. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The voice didn't sound like any of my neighbors. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but with an odd, grating quality that set my teeth on edge. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What do you want?" "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm so cold, so wet. Let me in." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to lock every door and window in the house. But another part of me, the part that couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone out in this storm, made me hesitate. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't open the door to a stranger. Is there someone I can call for you? The police, maybe?" A sound came then that made my heart nearly stop. It was a laugh, but not one of mirth or even irony. It was a cold, hollow sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air around me. "No police," the voice said, suddenly deeper, no longer even attempting to sound human. "No one but you. Let me in." The last three words were punctuated by thunderous blows to the door, so powerful I felt them reverberate through the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. The pounding continued, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. I could hear the wood of the door creaking and splintering under the onslaught. I ran to the kitchen, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. But as I tried to dial 911, I realized with horror that there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. A deafening crack echoed through the house, and I knew the door had given way. Heavy footsteps thudded on the hardwood floor of the entryway, accompanied by a sound like wet cloth dragging across the ground. I looked around wildly, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes fell on the back door. It was my only chance. I bolted for it, not daring to look behind me. I could hear it coming, its breathing loud and ragged, far too close for comfort. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open the door. Finally, it swung open, and I plunged out into the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, instantly soaking me to the bone. The wind howled, nearly drowning out the inhuman shriek of rage that came from inside the house. I ran blindly through our backyard, my feet slipping in the mud. I had no plan, no destination in mind. My only thought was to get as far away from that thing as possible. I reached the edge of our property, where a dense line of trees marked the beginning of the woods behind our house. I hesitated for a split second, the darkness between the trees looking even more impenetrable than the stormy night. Another shriek, closer this time, made the decision for me. I plunged into the woods, branches whipping at my face as I ran. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark, wet labyrinth. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on, terrified of what might happen if I stopped. Eventually, I burst out of the tree line and found myself on a road. In the distance, I could see lights. A gas station, its fluorescent glow a beacon of hope in the darkness. I staggered towards it, relief flooding through me as I saw a police car parked out front. I was safe. I was going to be okay. As I approached, the officer stepped out of his car, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, taking in my bedraggled appearance. I opened my mouth to respond, to pour out the whole terrifying story, but something made me stop. Over the officer's shoulder, I saw movement in the shadows beyond the gas station's bright lights. A figure stood there, tall and misshapen, its form seeming to shift and writhe in the darkness. As I watched, frozen in terror, it raised a hand. No, not a hand, a mass of writhing tentacles, and pressed a finger to where its mouth should be. The message was clear. Say nothing or else. I looked back at the officer, who was still waiting for my response. I'm fine," I stammered. "Just got caught in the storm, took a wrong turn on my walk." The officer didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. "Well, let's get you inside and dried off. We can call someone to come get you." As he led me towards the gas station, I couldn't resist one last glance over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but I could have sworn I heard that cold, hollow laugh carried on the wind. I spent that night in the gas station, wrapped in a scratchy blanket the attendant found in the back, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't tell anyone what had really happened. Who would believe me? When morning came and the rain finally stopped, I made my way back home. The front door was intact, showing no signs of the violent entry I'd witnessed the night before. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. There were no muddy footprints, no signs of an intruder. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a vivid nightmare brought on by the storm and too many late-night horror movies? But then I saw it. There, on the floor just inside the front door, was a single, long, black feather. As I picked it up, it seemed to writhe between my fingers, as if it were alive. I dropped it with a gasp and watched as it dissolved into a puddle of inky black liquid that quickly evaporated, leaving no trace behind. In that moment, I knew. It hadn't been a dream. It was real, all of it. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. I moved out of that house the very next day. I told my roommate and my family that I just needed a change of scenery. But the truth is, I couldn't bear to spend another night there wondering if that thing would come back. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing, sure that I've heard that soft tap, tap, tap at my door. And every time there's a storm, I make sure all my doors and windows are locked tight, because I know the truth that most people don't. Sometimes, the monsters that come knocking in the night are all too real, and once they've found you, they never truly let you go. The distant echo of footsteps jolted me from my half-asleep state. I blinked, trying to focus on the security monitors in front of me. The mall had been closed for hours, its vast corridors empty and dark. Yet there it was again, the unmistakable sound of someone walking, their steps echoing through the empty building. I'd been working as a night security guard at Willowbrook Mall for about 6 months. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. Most nights, I'd just make my rounds, check the locks, and spend the rest of the time watching Netflix on my phone. But tonight was different. The storm outside had been raging for hours, rain lashing against the skylights and thunder rumbling overhead. It was the kind of night that made you grateful to be indoors, even if that meant being alone in a creepy, empty mall. I leaned closer to the monitors, scanning each screen carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. The food court was deserted, chairs neatly stacked on tables. The fountain in the center court was still, its waters dark and silent. Even the toy store, usually so vibrant during the day, looked sad and abandoned in the dim emergency lighting. But there it was again. That sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere on the second floor. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, my heart beginning to race. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe some merchandise had fallen off a shelf or a stray cat had somehow gotten in. But as I made my way up the motionless escalator, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The second floor was even darker than the first, the emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows. I swept my flashlight back and forth, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast space. "Security? Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A voice, soft and distant, coming from the direction of the department store at the end of the corridor. "Help me," it said, barely more than a whisper. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is security. The mall is closed. You need to leave immediately." "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm lost. I can't find my way out." Against my better judgment, I started walking towards the sound. The department store loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping maw of darkness. As I got closer, I could see that the security gate was up. That was impossible. I'd checked it myself during my last round. I stepped into the store, my flashlight illuminating racks of clothing and shelves of merchandise. "Hello," I called out again. "Where are you?" A movement caught my eye, a flash of white disappearing behind a display of mannequins. I hurried towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded the corner, I saw a small figure huddled on the floor. It was a child, a little girl in a white dress, her face hidden in her hands. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay? How did you get in here?" The girl didn't respond. She just sat there, completely still, her face still hidden. "It's all right," I continued, reaching out a hand. "I'm here to help. Let's get you out of here and find your parents, okay?" Slowly, the girl lowered her hands. I felt my blood run cold. Where her face should have been, there was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight in shock. The girl, if you could call it that, stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It took a step towards me, its head tilting to one side at an impossible angle. "What the hell?" I gasped, my back hitting a clothing rack. Hangers clattered to the floor around me. The thing that looked like a little girl opened its mouth, a dark, gaping hole appearing in its featureless face. From it came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was like 1,000 voices screaming in agony. All at once, I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted out of the department store, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps no longer slow and deliberate but rapid, gaining on me with inhuman speed. I reached the escalator and practically flew down it, taking the steps 3 at a time. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was at the top of the escalator, but it wasn't using the steps. It was crawling down the handrail on all fours, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my heart feeling like it might burst from my chest. I could see the exit ahead, the glass doors promising safety beyond. Just as I reached them, I heard a crash behind me. I turned to see the thing had leaped from the escalator, landing on a kiosk and crushing it beneath its weight. It stood up slowly, its blank face turning towards me. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my keys, trying to find the one that would unlock the door. I could hear it coming closer, its footsteps echoing in the empty mall. Finally, I found the right key. I shoved it into the lock, turned it, and burst out into the stormy night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the far corner of the parking lot. As I fumbled with my car keys, I looked back at the mall. There, pressed against the glass doors, was the faceless child. It stood perfectly still, watching me. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and waved. I got into my car and drove away as fast as I could, not caring about the speed limit or the rain-slicked roads. I didn't stop until I was miles away, pulling into a 24-hour diner where I spent the rest of the night, jumping at every sound and shadow. I never went back to that job. I called the next day and quit, making up some excuse about a family emergency. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the rain is pounding against my windows, I think about that mall. I wonder if that thing is still there, wandering the empty corridors, waiting for someone else to hear its cry for help. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find me again. So if you're ever in a place that should be empty, a closed store, an abandoned building, or a dark and silent mall, and you hear footsteps or a voice calling for help, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because some things that lurk in the darkness are best left undisturbed. And once they've seen you, they never forget. They never stop hunting. And sooner or later, when you least expect it, they'll find you. Just like I know, deep in my bones, that one day that faceless child will find me. And when it does, I can only hope I'll be ready. The old house loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the storm-ravaged sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its decrepit facade for a split second before plunging it back into shadow. I glanced at my best friend, Mike, and saw my own apprehension mirrored in his eyes. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," I said, having to raise my voice to be heard over the howling wind and pelting rain. Mike shook his head, rain dripping from his matted hair. "Come on, Alex. We've come this far. It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" I wish I'd never found out the answer to that question. We'd been on our way back from a concert in the city when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, turning the sky an ominous shade of green before unleashing its fury. The rain was so heavy we could barely see the road. And when we took a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut, we ended up hopelessly lost. That's when we saw it, the old Victorian house, standing alone at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. It looked abandoned, but we thought maybe we could at least take shelter on the porch until the storm passed. As we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house seemed to loom larger with each step, its windows like dark, hollow eyes watching our approach. The porch steps creaked ominously under our feet, the sound barely audible over the raging storm. We huddled under the sagging porch roof, grateful for even this small respite from the rain. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, barely visible through the grime-covered windows, but unmistakable. A flickering, warm glow coming from somewhere deep within the house. "Mike," I said, grabbing his arm. "Look, there's a light on inside." He squinted through the rain-streaked glass. "Holy shit. You're right. Maybe someone lives here after all." Before I could stop him, Mike was knocking on the door. The sound echoed unnaturally loud, seeming to reverberate through the entire house. We waited, the seconds stretching into minutes. Just as I was about to suggest we leave, we heard it, a faint sound, like someone calling for help. Mike's eyes widened. "Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble." He tried the doorknob, and to our surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a low, mournful creak. The interior of the house was dark, save for that faint, flickering light we'd seen from outside. It seemed to be coming from somewhere upstairs. "Hello?" Mike called out. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The answering cry was louder this time, definitely coming from upstairs. It sounded pained, desperate. I grabbed Mike's arm as he started to step inside. "Wait, this doesn't feel right. Maybe we should call the police." He shook off my hand. "There's no signal out here, you know that. Someone could be hurt. We can't just leave them." With that, he stepped over the threshold. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. I couldn't let him go alone, no matter how much every instinct was screaming at me to run. The floorboards groaned under our feet as we made our way through the foyer. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of decay and something else. Something I couldn't quite place but that made my skin crawl. We found the stairs, a grand sweeping structure that might have been beautiful once but now was rotting and sagging. The light was definitely coming from the second floor, growing brighter as we ascended. At the top of the stairs, we paused. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the storm raging outside. "Hello," Mike called again. "We're here to help. Where are you?" A door at the end of the hallway slowly creaked open. The flickering light spilled out, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. We approached cautiously, peering into the room. It was some kind of study or library, the walls lined with towering bookshelves. In the center of the room was an old desk, and on it, the source of the light. A single candle, its flame dancing in a non-existent breeze. But what caught our attention was the figure huddled in the corner. It looked like an old woman, her face hidden by long, matted gray hair. "Ma'am," Mike said softly, stepping into the room. "Are you all right?" We heard crying. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. I hung back in the doorway, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Something was very, very wrong here. Mike crouched down next to the woman, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Ma'am." What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my days. The woman's head snapped up, and I saw her face, or rather the lack of it. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, broken by a gaping, tooth-lined maw that opened in a silent scream. Mike recoiled, falling backward with a cry of terror. The thing that wasn't a woman unfolded itself, its body stretching and contorting in impossible ways until it loomed over us, easily 8 feet tall. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched in horror as it reached for Mike with hands that ended in long, razor-sharp claws. Mike's scream snapped me out of my paralysis. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm and yanking him away just as those deadly claws slashed through the air where he had been. "Run!" I yelled, pulling him towards the door. We sprinted down the hallway, the thing's inhuman shrieks echoing behind us. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. It was crawling after us, its body twisting and writhing as it scuttled along the walls and ceiling like some monstrous spider. We practically flew down the stairs, our feet barely touching the steps. I could hear it right behind us, its claws scraping against the wood. We burst out of the front door and into the storm, not stopping, not looking back. We ran through the overgrown yard, branches whipping at our faces, mud sucking at our feet. Finally, we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I slammed the car into drive, tires spinning in the mud before finally finding purchase. As we sped away, I allowed myself one last look in the rearview mirror. There, standing in the middle of the road, was the thing from the house. It raised one grotesquely long arm, almost as if it was waving goodbye. We drove for hours, not speaking, not stopping until we were far, far away from that house. We never spoke about what happened that night, not to each other, not to anyone. Who would believe us? But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the shadows seem to move on their own, I think about that house. I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next unlucky travelers to seek shelter from the storm. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if that thing is still there too, waiting patiently for someone else to hear its cry for help. So if you're ever driving on a stormy night and you see an old, abandoned house, don't stop. Don't seek shelter. Keep driving, no matter how bad the weather gets. Because sometimes, the storm isn't the most dangerous thing out there. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the bridge. As if on cue, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain that turned the world into a watery blur. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my chest. Of all the places to break down, this had to be the worst. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun both the storm and my own thoughts. The fight with my girlfriend, the stress of my job, the feeling that my life was spiraling out of control. I thought a long drive might clear my head. Instead, it had led me here, to this desolate bridge in the middle of nowhere, with angry clouds above and churning water below. I tried the key again, praying for the engine to turn over, but it was no use. The car was dead. I reached for my phone, already knowing what I'd find. No signal. Of course not. That would be too easy. Rain lashed against the windows, driven by a wind that seemed to want to push my car right off the bridge. I peered through the windshield, trying to gauge how far I was from either end. The bridge stretched out before and behind me, disappearing into the gloom. I couldn't see land in either direction. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing in the rain. But as I squinted, I could make out shapes moving on the bridge. People. No, not people. The shapes were too tall, too thin, their movements too fluid to be human. They emerged from the mist like ghosts, dark silhouettes against the gray backdrop of the storm. There were 3 of them, spread out across the width of the bridge, moving towards my car with a slow, deliberate pace. My mouth went dry, my palms sweating despite the chill in the air. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could I go? I was trapped on this bridge, my dead car the only shelter from whatever was approaching. As they drew closer, I could make out more details, each one making my heart race faster. They were impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, with limbs that seemed too long and thin for their bodies. Their faces, I couldn't see their faces, just smooth, featureless expanses where features should have been. They reached my car, surrounding it. One stood at the front, one at the back, and one right outside my driver's side window. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might provoke them. A sound cut through the pounding of the rain, a tapping on my window. Slow, deliberate, like the way they had walked. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, ever so slowly, to look out my window. The creature stood there, its blank face inches from the glass. As I watched, horrified, a seam appeared where its mouth should be. It split open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Let us in," it said, its voice a hiss that somehow carried through the closed window and the roar of the storm. "We only want to help." I shook my head, unable to speak, unable to look away from that terrible mouth. The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that only served to emphasize how inhuman it truly was. "Your car is broken," it continued. "The storm is getting worse. Let us help you." "No," I managed to croak out. "No, thank you. I'm fine." The creature's mouth stretched wider, a grotesque parody of a smile. "Are you sure it's not safe out here? Anything could happen to you." The threat in its words was unmistakable. I glanced at the other 2 creatures. They had moved closer, pressing against the car. I could hear the metal groaning under their touch. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Please just leave me alone." The creature at my window leaned closer, its blank face filling my vision. "We can't do that," it said. You see, we're hungry. So very hungry. And you look delicious. Terror surged through me, breaking through the paralysis of fear. I lunged for the key, turning it desperately. To my shock and relief, the engine roared to life. I didn't stop to question this miracle. I slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The creature shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my vision blur. The car shot forward, and I felt a moment of resistance, then a sickening thud as I hit one of them. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove blindly through the rain, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. I could hear things hitting the roof and sides of the car. Were they jumping on it? Throwing things? I didn't dare look. I just drove, faster than I'd ever driven in my life, praying to whatever might be listening that I'd reach the end of this nightmare bridge. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw it. The end of the bridge, solid ground ahead. I nearly cried with relief. As soon as my tires hit asphalt, the pounding on my car stopped. The shrieking faded away, replaced by the steady drumming of rain. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I just kept driving, putting as much distance between me and that bridge as I could. I drove all night, through the storm and beyond. When the sun finally rose, I found myself in a small town I didn't recognize. I pulled into a diner parking lot, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. In the harsh light of day, I examined my car. There were dents all over the roof and hood and long scratches down the sides. The back window was cracked, spiderweb patterns spreading across the glass. But it was the smear of something dark and viscous across the front bumper that made my stomach turn. I couldn't bring myself to look at it too closely. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? I told my girlfriend I'd had an accident, swerved to avoid an animal on a rainy night. She was just relieved I was okay. But I'm not okay. Not really. I can't sleep without seeing those faceless creatures in my dreams. I can't drive over bridges without breaking into a cold sweat. And every time it rains, I find myself checking the shadows, sure that I'll see those tall, thin shapes emerging from the gloom. I don't know what those things were, or why they chose me that night. Were they some kind of monsters, aliens, demons, or something else entirely, something our human minds can't comprehend? All I know is that they're out there, waiting on lonely bridges and deserted roads, waiting for someone's car to break down, for someone to be vulnerable and alone, waiting to help. So if you're ever driving late at night and your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, be careful. Don't trust the shapes you see in the rain. Don't listen to the voices that offer help. And whatever you do, don't let them in, because once they've found you, they'll never truly let you go. And the next time your car breaks down, they might not take no for an answer. A flash of lightning illuminated the cave entrance, a gaping maw in the mountainside that seemed to beckon me forward. I hesitated, caught between the fury of the storm at my back and the unknown darkness ahead. Another crack of thunder made the decision for me. I plunged into the cavern, the sound of my ragged breathing echoing off the damp stone walls. I hadn't planned on going spelunking that day. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a chance to clear my head and escape the pressures of my job and my failing relationship. But as I climbed higher into the mountains, the weather turned treacherous. The blue sky darkened to an ominous gray, and before I knew it, I was caught in one of the most violent storms I'd ever seen. Now, as I stood just inside the cave entrance, watching sheets of rain lash the forest outside, I tried to calm my racing heart. It's just a storm, I told myself. It'll pass soon, and then I can make my way back down the mountain. I fumbled in my backpack for my flashlight, grateful that I'd thought to pack it. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a passage that stretched deeper into the mountain. Curious despite my apprehension, I took a few steps forward. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were just odd formations in the rock, tricks of light and shadow. Moved my flashlight beam across the cave wall. I realized I was looking at paintings. Ancient paintings, crude yet eerily lifelike, depicting scenes I couldn't quite comprehend. There were human figures, stick-like and primitive, arranged in what looked like a circle. In the center of the circle was something else, something that made my skin crawl just looking at it. It was larger than the human figures. Its form